I'm crouched in a muddy crater, boots sinking into blood-soaked dirt, trying to stuff man's insides back where they belong. He's screaming, "Emperor," that sound. And I can't even hear my own frantic prayers over the barrage pounding around us. A mortar shell lands with a teeth-rattling blast, spraying shards of rocket and muddy earth over my helmet. I hunch farther over the wounded trooper beneath me as debris patters down. My hands keep working, slippery with blood, feeling for the severed artery somewhere in the mangled mess of his belly. The air stinks of burning promethium and charred flesh, a stench that clings to the back of my throat. They never put this in the recruitment pamphlet. Just hold on, damn it, I mutter, not sure if I'm talking to him or to myself. The soldier on the ground thrown, I think it's Corporal Lan, is beyond hearing anyway. His eyes roll back white and wide shock, swallowing his screams into wet gurgles. A chunk of shrapnel the size of a fist has torn open his abdomen, and his intestines are bulging out between my fingers. I grit my teeth and fight down the rising bile in my throat. Focus. I yank a packet of coagulant from my Medicate with one hand, tear it open with my teeth, and dump the clotting powder into the wound. Blood loss slows to an ooze. Better, but not enough. My other hand is already jamming a high-capacity synth blood injector against his neck. A sharp hiss, and a dose of precious artificial plasma flows into his veins. It might buy him a few more minutes of life, if the Emperor is kind. Another cry rises amid the chaos. Medic, medic. Further down the trench, someone else is screaming for help. There's always more wounded. There's never enough of me. I bite back a curse and force myself to stay focused on the man in front of me. Lan's breaths are coming in shallow rasps with a quick prayer to the God Emperor. I slap a sealant patch over the gaping wound and cinch it tight. The bandage blossoms red almost instantly. My hands are shaking, adrenaline making the world too sharp and bright. Emperor, grant me the strength to save this soul, I whisper, half chanting a line from the Imperial Catechism of Healing. As I work, my voice trembles, but the familiar words steady my nerves a little. In the den of battle, the prayer is just for me. A Medici prayer won't miraculously knit Lan's torn guts back together, but it keeps the panic at bay for a few more precious seconds. Lan's eyes flutter open for a moment. He looks at me, lips moving soundlessly. I lean close, straining to catch the words over the thundering of heavy guns. Am I going to make it? He gasps, blood flecking his lips. I force what I hope is a reassuring grin onto my mud-smeared face. You'll be fine, I shouting to be heard as another blast shakes the ground. Stay with me. That's an order, trooper. He actually tries to chuckle at that. Emperor, bless him. He's still got some spirit, but the sound comes out wet and wrong. He coughs violently, and more blood froths between his teeth. His grip on my arm is weakening. I've done all I can for him here. Any more and I'll just be delaying the inevitable. The field dressing is already soaked through and I have maybe 2 more doses of synth blood in my kit. But there are dozens more bleeding out along this line. Hard choices. One thing they drill into you as a field medic: you can't save everyone. Sometimes you can't even save anyone. The best you can do is decide who has a chance and who needs the Emperor's peace. Emperor's peace. My eyes flick to the last pistol holstered at my hip. Lan is breathing in ragged, shallow bursts. Each one may be his last. Do I ease his passing, or keep trying the impossible? I swallow hard. Not yet. He's still conscious, still looking at me with that desperate hope. As long as he's fighting, I fight for him. Hang on, I say again, softer this time. In the distance, I hear the whine of engines. Our engines, thank the throne. Over the trench lip, I glimpse the blurred shape of a chimera armored transport, racing up with a red medic cross emblazoned on its side. The familiar bone-white uniforms of Medici orderlies are visible in the back. Finally, backup. Maybe they'll have space to evacuate land to a proper field hospital behind the lines. If we even have a behind the lines left, I wave them down with a frantic arm. The chimera's rear ramp clatters open before it even stops, and two stretcher bearers leap out. Together we lift Lan's limp form onto a waiting stretcher. Careful, careful. I bark as one of them jostles his torn midsection. They nod, faces grim, and rush him into the vehicle's hold, disappearing into the haze of Promethean exhaust. I step back, chest heaving, suddenly aware of how cold the rain has gotten. My hands are stained nearly black red, and trembling worse now that the adrenaline is ebbing. For a second, I just stand there in the muck, staring at my dripping hands and listening to the distant wail of the chimera's engine as it flies Lan away to relative safety. Then another shout. Medic, over here, hurry, duty calls. I grab my kit, wipe my brow with a blood-smeared sleeve, and slog off toward the next cry for help. Boots squatching in the trench mud. Just another day in the Imperial Guard. Just another day in my life as a field medic on the front lines of humanity's endless war. That was one morning on the battlefront, one of uncountable mornings I've spent patching up the Emperor's soldiers under fire. Perhaps I should introduce myself properly while we have a moment, and before the Vox crackles with orders and the next bombardment begins. My name is Aurelius Hakon, Field Medic, identification number 38/7, Medici of the 145th Cadian Infantry. Most folks just call me Doc. Original, I know. I've been serving as a medic in the Astro Militarum for close to 6 years, and in that time, I've seen more blood and death than any sane person ought to. I'm the poor soul who carries a Medicaid in one hand and a lust gun in the other, doing my damnedest to keep my fellow guardsmen alive in this Emperor-forsaken war. Right now, my unit is stuck in the mud of Garan Prime, a once thriving industrial world, now turned charnel house. We're months into a campaign to retake Hive Solace from a traitorous uprising. When High Command briefed us, they called it a simple suppression of rebels, seditious miners and factory workers who'd gotten ideas above their station. Easy work for the mighty Imperial Guard, they said. Just pacify the Hive, restore order. They lied, or Emperor helped them. They had no idea what they were walking us into. Hive Solace is a nightmare of shattered spires and burning streets. The rebels, and there are far more of them than anyone predicted, fortified every other hatcher block and manufacturer on. They rigged the Underhive with traps and turned the whole lower city into a kill zone. What was supposed to be a quick crackdown turned into a grinding war of attrition through narrow corridors and sprawling sump fields. They showed no mercy to loyal citizens either. Countless innocents were caught in the crossfire or massacred outright. By the time we fought our way in, those civilians who hadn't fled or been butchered were hiding in whatever holes they could find. We did what we could for them, but war leaves little room for compassion. Often, all I could offer was a quick bandage and a hollow promise that we'd secure the area soon. It was rarely true, and something is very wrong here beneath the surface of mere rebellion. Though at first we were all too busy trying not to die to see it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to how a quiet boy from Cadia found himself in the thick of one of the bloodiest war zones imaginable. I wasn't born a soldier. Before the Guard, I grew up in a hab block on Cadia's Carrick district under the shadow of massive fortress walls. As a kid, I helped my mother, a mid-hive medici, tend to sick workers and injured factory drudges. By the time I was 16, I could suture a cut and set a broken bone as well as any apprentice in the medic halls. I won't pretend I had altruistic dreams of healing the masses. Back then, learning medicine was simply a way to put food on our table and help our neighbors where I could. When Cadia's tithes came due, the Astro Militarum took me like they take so many. One day, I was bandaging up a gang's knife wound in a hive clinic. The next, I was wearing an ill-fitting flak vest and swearing oaths of loyalty to the God Emperor and Cadia's Lord Castellan. I hadn't planned to become a guard medic at all. Initially, I was slated to be just another rifleman, but during basic training, our drill sergeant saw me splint a fellow cadet's arm after a nasty fall on the assault course. Next thing I knew, I was reassigned to combat lifesaver training. Apparently, they figured our half-trained medic was better than none. Combat medic training was a special kind of hell. Imagine all the usual physical torments of boot camp, forced marches, live fire exercises, drill instructors screaming in your face. Then add memorizing thick tomes of anatomy, battlefield triage protocols, and medici liturgies by the flicker of a failing loom globe at 2 a.m. each night. They taught me how to stitch a wound with trembling hands while explosions shook the ground around me. They taught me how to mix combat stems and analytics from whatever I could scratch in the field. They taught me the fastest way to sever a gangrenous limb. Turn high, cut clean through the joint, cauterize with a hot knife, and try not to vomit in your rebreather mask while doing it. Most importantly, they drilled into me the catechisms of the medici, prayers to the God Emperor for steadiness, for compassion, for the will to do what must be done. I prayed to slow the blood and staunch the wound. I must have chanted that 1,000,000 times over while learning to calm a bleeding soldier and calm myself, truth be told. Did those prayers actually help? Who knows? In the God, faith and skill often blur. You use whatever keeps you going. After training, I was shipped out to join the 145th Cadian as their newest medic. We deployed in one war zone after another, chasing orc war bands through the swamps of Vidian Prime, garrison duty, on the frozen moon of Peline. But nothing compared to the meat grinder that awaited us here on Goron Prime. We arrived on Goron Prime about a standard year ago. I remember stepping off the Valkyrie transport onto ash-gray soil, thinking the whole place looked dead. Even then, the sky was a dirty orange from the manufacturer-owned fumes pouring out of the hive stacks. We could hear distant gunfire echoing from the direction of Hive Solace, even as we formed up on the landing field. Not a good sign. Our regiment made camp in an abandoned Promethean refinery 10 kilometers from the hive walls. Those first few nights we slept under broken pipelines and rusting gantries, listening to artillery rumbling day and night like a distant storm. I busied myself checking and rechecking my supplies, bandage rolls, coagulants, antitoxins for chemical exposure, even the few precious vials of spook combat stimulant in my kit, all the little tools that might keep a man alive. I had this nervous habit of patting my Medicaid every so often to make sure it was still there. It felt like a talisman of life in a sea of looming death. We were thrown into the fighting almost immediately. The 145th split into companies
answering, that's when reality hit me in the face like a trench shovel. Within the first week, I had treated dozens of wounded, many of them friends I'd been laughing with in the mess the day before, and some I couldn't help at all. I quickly learned the unspoken truth of being a guard medic. Do everything you can, but sometimes the Emperor's peace is the only mercy you can give. The first time I had to administer it was during those initial battles in the Hive outskirts. A skirmish in a shattered hab block against well-dug-in rebel PDF. A sniper put a last round clean through the gut of a kid from 3rd Platoon named Stephen. By the time I crawled to him under the rubble, half his insides were burned to jelly. He was screaming for his mother. Thrown. He couldn't have been older than 17, a year younger than me at the time.
What little I could, pressed a dressing on the wound, gave him a shot of painkiller. He grabbed my flak coat, begging me not to let him die. I lied to him too, told him he'd be okay. We both knew the truth. In the end, following protocol and swallowing my tears, I recited the Emperor's benediction over him and gave him an overdose of morphia strong enough to stop his heart. I stayed with him, watched the light fade from his eyes, and hoped he found peace in the Emperor's arms. Then I had to move on because there were 20 more Svens bleeding in the rubble and only one of me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat under a cracked plaque wall with my Medicaid in my lap, staring at my blood-stained hands, wondering if I'd done right by that boy. Our platoon sergeant, old Jiren Hale, found me there. He didn't say much, but he put a tin cup of recaf in my hands and patted my shoulder. "You did what you had to, Doc," he said gruffly. "That's more than most can say. Sometimes I think those were the kindest words anyone's ever spoken to me." Since then, I've lost count of how many soldiers I've watched die despite my best efforts. You'd think it would get easier. It hasn't. Emperor willing, it never will. The day it becomes easy is the day I've lost any shred of humanity I have left. But I have gotten faster, more hardened perhaps. I work quickly now. My hands don't shake as much in the moment. The screams, the blood, the horrific sights that used to turn my stomach. I won't say I'm numb to them, but I've learned to push them aside and focus on the task. Focus, patch, move on, feel it later in the rare quiet moments we get. And here on Guran Prime, quiet moments are rare indeed. We pressed onward into Hive solace, street by street, room by room. Urban combat is a special kind of hell. The Hive city wasn't just a backdrop, it was an enemy in its own right. Every alley, every blown-out hab unit, every flickering shadow could hide someone who wanted to kill us. I remember one assault in particular, a few weeks into the campaign when my squad was tasked with clearing an administrative archive building that the rebels had turned into a strong point. The structure was a Gothic pile of plastile and rocket, once an office complex perhaps, now half collapsed and pockmarked by shell impacts. They labeled it Section 46 on our tactical map, but to us it was just a death trap waiting to spring. Sergeant Hale led the way, motioning us forward with quick hand signals. We stacked up along a shattered archway that used to be the main entrance. Inside, the corridor beyond was pitch dark, lit only by flickering emergency lumen strips and the intermittent flash of lost gunfire deeper within. The rebels knew we were coming. Stack and clear 2 by 2. Watch your corners, Hale hissed over our squad. Vox, I was at the back of the stack. As the medic, they try not to put me first through the door, if it can be helped. Not that a bullet cares what my rank or role is. Trooper Lin, our pointman, pulled the pin on a flashbang and tossed it through the arch. We all turned away. A blinding white flash and concussive whomp shook dust from the ceiling. Then we were in. The next few minutes were a blur of muzzle flashes and shouted orders. The rebels had erected crude barricades of overturned desks and filing cabinets across the lobby. They popped up from behind them to fire auto guns wildly in our direction. We answered with disciplined volleys of las fire lancing through the gloom, punctuated by the boom of our squad's grenade launcher, sending a frag round into their cover. I hugged the left wall of the hallway, firing off a few shots at a shadow moving on an upper balcony. The air was thick with smoke, and plaster dust kicked up by the grenade. Somewhere to my right, I heard the whoosh of a flamer, likely our flamer trooper, Darwin, bathing a side passage in cleansing fire to flush out any hiding cultists. The screams that followed told me he found his mark. We advanced methodically, room by room. I stepped over bodies, some wearing the ragtag fatings of rebel militia, others in the familiar gray of fallen guardsmen, from the first platoon that tried to clear this place yesterday. We hadn't been the first ones sent into this God's forsaken archive, but by the Emperor, we intended to be the last. On the second floor, just as we secured the stairwell, an ambush hit us. A side door flew open, and a hail of stubborn fire spat out, cutting across our flank. Heavy caliber rounds chewed into the wall. One caught a trooper.
Ooh!
Gino, full in the chest. His armor absorbed a couple of the slugs with a thack, but at least one round found a gap. Gino cried out and went down hard, dropping his last gun and clutching at his torso. Man down, left door, someone shouted. I was already rushing to Gino's side, heart in my throat. Hale and the others poured suppressing fire into that doorway, keeping the rebels back. I grabbed Gino by the straps of his flak vest and dragged him behind a pillar. Slugs sparked off the stone around us as the stubber chewed the corner. Gino was gasping, eyes wide with shock. Doc, it hurts, he groaned, voice thin. Stay with me, Gino, I said firmly, pulling his trembling hands away so I could see the wound. My fingers found a jagged tear in his flak armor just below the ribs. Blood was welling out, warm and thick, probably a punctured kidney or nicked an artery. Internal bleeding for sure. Gritting my teeth, I shrugged off my last gun so it wouldn't clatter in my way and tore open Gino's tunic. A nasty exit wound oozed in his lower back. Not good, but maybe survivable if I worked fast. I grabbed a synth blood injector from my kit and jammed it into his arm. The device whirred, pumping fluid into his veins to keep his blood pressure up. All the while, last fire and stubber rounds were trading just meters away. Our squad pushed into the side room to clear it. Grenades went off. Men screamed. I tuned it out. Gino was my battle right now. Just a scratch. Trooper, you'll be back on your feet in no time. I lied with a wink as I worked. He tried to laugh but coughed up blood instead. Crimson drooling down his chin. Emperor, preserve him. He knew it was bad, and so did I. I slapped a high-strength coagulant patch onto the entry wound and pressed down hard. Gino writhed, biting off a scream through clenched teeth. I know it burns means it's working, I murmured, trying to sound calm. Truth was, the accurate smell of his blood mixing with the clotting chemicals made my own stomach lurch, but I swallowed it down. A fresh barrage of gunfire burst from that doorway, forcing the rest of the squad to duck back. Trooper Garin, who was covering our rear, shouted in pain as a stray round clipped his leg. Without thinking, I snatched up my last pistol with my free hand and blind fired a few shots around the pillar to keep those bastards' heads down. I'm no marksman, but it made them think twice about rushing us. At that moment, Darwin, our flamer, charged past with a roar, his heavy Promethean tank clanking on his back. He disappeared into the doorway, and a whoosh of flame followed by anguished shrieks told me he had introduced the heretics to cleansing fire. A heartbeat later, Hale's voice crackled over Vox. Clear, enemies down. We had carried the day, at least in this Emperor-forsaken building, but my job was far from done. Garin limped over, cursing and favoring his blooded calf. It's just a scratch, Doc. See to Gino first, he insisted through gritted teeth. Stubborn. As always, his leg had a through and through hole the size of a finger, bleeding like a leaky faucet. But he was right. Gino was worse off. With the fighting in Section 46 subsiding, the rest of the squad spread out to secure the area and radio for reinforcements. I focused on Gino. His breathing was shallow and rapid, classic shock. The synth blood and clot patch had slowed the hemorrhaging, but he needed real surgery soon, or he'd bleed out internally. Sergeant Hale stomped over, reloading his last gun with a fresh power pack. How is he? His tone was brusque, but I could see the concern in the tightness around his eyes. Bad. He needs a vac to the rear lines ASAP if he's going to live, I answered, still packing gauze around Gino's wounds and stabilizing him as best I could. Hale gave a curt nod and keyed his calm bead. Command, this is Eagle Squad. We have heavy casualties, one critical in Section 46. Strong point. Secure. Requesting medevac and relief. Over. As we waited for a transport, either a Chimera or Valkyrie, whichever command could spare, I kept working on Gino, monitoring his vitals. He faded in and out, occasionally moaning. To keep him focused, I pulled out a low stick from my pouch against regulations, but who cared, and lit it for him, then pressed it between his lips. Normally I'd never let a patient smoke. Terrible for the lungs, you know. But out here, a bit of familiar comfort can do wonders. Gino gave me a weak, grateful grin and took a shaky drag, which promptly made him cough. But at least he was breathing a bit easier afterward. Moments like that, oddly tender amid the carnage, are what keep you human. While hunkered down, waiting for evacuation, I took stock of the squad. Garin's leg was bandaged tightly. He'd be fine after a day's rest, and a shot of sin skin to seal the wound. Darwin was miraculously unscathed, except for some singed eyebrows. I saw him scraping charred bits of rebel off his flaming nozzle with an irritated expression. Lynn and another trooper, Merrick, were policing weapons and checking the bodies for intel or usable ammo. Sergeant Hale stood by a half-shattered stained glass window, keeping watch. The colorful pane depicted some long-dead Imperial saint. Now it was riddled with bullet holes, and only fragments of the Emperor's halo remained intact in the glass. In that lull, as adrenaline ebbed, I realized with a mix of surprise and relief that we had all gotten through that fight alive. Thank the Emperor. Gino was hurt bad. Yes, but breathing. That counted as a victory in my book. So many times the victory condition for me is simply, they're still breathing. Then in the silence, Trooper Lynn called out from the side office, his voice echoing uneasily. Sarge, better take a look at this.
We gathered around what had been the rebels' command post, a large desk strewn with maps and papers, lit by a flickering data slate. But that's not what held our attention. On the wall above the desk, illuminated by a swinging guttering lumen, was a symbol scrolled in what looked horribly like dried blood. A circular rune with 3 overlapping rings and twisting filaments radiating outward like a diseased sun. Something about that mark made my skin crawl. This wasn't the usual graffiti of disgruntled workers or the makeshift flag of secessionists. It felt wrong on a fundamental level, like my eyes weren't meant to comprehend it. Hale grimaced. Great heretical scribbles. Just what we needed. None of us said it outright, but we all thought the same. Chaos. These weren't just malcontents or angry laborers. There was something far more sinister behind this uprising. I exchanged a glance with Gon, who muttered a quick benediction and traced the sign of the Aquila over his chest, despite wincing from his leg wound. I didn't blame him. I silently mouthed the litany of protection under my breath. Emperor, shield us from whatever corruption stains this place. Command will want to know about this, Hale said firmly. He pulled down the ragged cloth banner bearing the blood mark and folded it away to hand over to intelligence later. But our orders haven't changed. We keep pushing. Let the Inquisition worry about the cult crap. Classic Hale. Focus on the job at hand. Leave the bigger nightmares to someone else. Still, as we filed out of that arsed building with Gino on a makeshift stretcher, I couldn't shake the gnawing dread in my gut. I'm trained to deal with flesh and blood, bones and brains. I can set a femur or purge an infection. But if this war was about to dip into the supernatural, corrupted symbols and dark powers, what the hell was I supposed to do about that? We had heard rumors about chaos cults before, but seeing that mark confirmed our worst fears. I had faced Xenos before. Nothing as legendary as space marines fighting tyranids, but our regiment had it.
Brushes. I remembered an orc war band on Vidian, savage and brutal, but ultimately just muscle and bone, that fell to lass in bayonet, like anything else. That was a tangible enemy, something I could understand and treat wounds from. This felt different. How do you mend a man's soul when the very air is tainted? How do you fight an enemy you can't even see until it's already inside your body, rotting him from within? The questions gnawed at me. I hoped, perhaps foolishly, that maybe this was just one isolated incident. A few lunatics painting walls with blood to scare us. Perhaps the rest of the rebels were just desperate fools, not true heretics. Emperor, how I hoped. We fell back to an occupied Hablock that night to rest and regroup. The rain had started again, drumming on broken placerit as darkness settled over the war-torn district. Our platoon set up a perimeter in the gutted remains of an apartment complex. The upper floors were mostly blown out, but the ground level offered some shelter from the biting wind and the ever-present threat of snipers. Inside what had once been a lobby, a few flickering lanterns cast dim light over a scene of pure exhaustion. Several guardsmen slumped against walls or on makeshift seats, checking weapons or gnawing absent-mindedly on ration bars. The adrenaline of the day's fight had long drained, leaving a hollow-eyed fatigue in its wake. I made my rounds as always, stitching up a gash on Trooper Merrick's forearm, shrapnel from that stubborn ambush, distributing 2 remaining pain tabs to those who needed them most, checking on Geno, who had been safely evacuated, thank the Emperor. As I passed by my comrades, a few gave tired pats on my shoulder, or murmured, thanks. I nodded, murmuring encouragements. I barely remember. The praise felt undeserved, Too many of our number lay silent under blood-spattered tarps at the back of the room for me to feel like a hero. Eventually, my duties were done, and I allowed myself to sit down for a moment. I slid down with my back against a wall between Garen and Darwin. Garen was carefully reloading lost gun power packs with bandaged fingers, while Darwin had his flamer's nozzle disassembled and was meticulously scraping soot and char from it. For a while, none of us spoke. We just listened to the distant thump of artillery and the drip of water through the shattered ceiling. Finally, Trooper Merrick wandered over, cradling his freshly bandaged arm. He was one of the younger lads, couldn't be more than 19, with a scraggly attempt at a goatee and eyes that hadn't quite lost all their youthful shine despite everything. "How's the arm?" I asked him quietly as he sank down beside us. He managed to grin. "Just a scratch, Doc. Your stitches are a work of art." He flexed his fingers a bit and nodded appreciatively. Then, with a furtive glance around, Merrick produced a small metal flask from inside his flak jacket. "I liberated a little something from Lieutenant Darrow's stash," he whispered conspiratorially. "Figure tonight warrants a sip, eh?" Garen raised an eyebrow. "Stealing from the lieutenant, are we, Merrick?" Merrick shrugged, though the mention of Darrow brought a shadow over his face. "Pretty sure Lieutenant Darrow's dead, Sarge. He was with 2nd Platoon in that ambush at the plaza yesterday." His attempt at nonchalance faltered. A heavy silence followed as we absorbed that news. Darrow had been a good officer. We drank with him just last week. Now he was another name on the regiment's casualty list. Wordlessly, Merrick unscrewed the flask and took a swig, then passed it to Garen. "To Darrow," Merrick said quietly. Garen nodded and raised the flask a little. "To Darrow." He took a gulp of the contents and hissed at the burn. With a grimace, he handed the flask to me. I sniffed the mouth. Cheap amas by the smell, but potent. "Two absent friends," I murmured, tipping it back. The liquor scorched my throat and spread molten heat through my gut, but it was a welcome warmth. Darwin took it last. "Throne that hits the spot," he croaked after a swig, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Then he held the flask up, as if making a toast to the ruined, darkened room. "To all the poor bastards who didn't make it today, we'll see you again in the Emperor's Hall." A few nearby troopers murmured agreement. "Here, here," and Emperor sheltered them under their breaths. For a brief moment, camaraderie and a few drops of booze lightened the weight on our hearts. As Merrick tucked the now nearly empty flask away, he managed a faint smirk. "I hate this place. Smells like a Gro's pen and looks worse. Could be worse." Darwin grunted, reassembling a piece of his flamer's nozzle. "We could be on latrine duty back at base." Merrick snorted. "I'd trade in a heartbeat. Give me a mop and a bucket over rot, monsters and trench foot any day." Garen chuckled softly. "Careful what you wish for. Keep talking like that, and the commissar will have you charging the enemy armed with that mop." We all actually laughed at that. A low, weary laugh, but genuine. It felt almost wrong to laugh, given everything, yet at the same time, it felt desperately necessary. I rubbed my gritty eyes with a filthy sleeve. "You know, I heard a joke once," I ventured. "A Katashian medic told it to me back on Vidian. He said, in the guard, every meal's a feast, every payday a fortune, every formation a parade." Oh, Darwin barked a dry laugh. "Palmer's been nice in his regiment." Merrick grinned. "Oh, absolutely. Why, this lovely vacation in Hive Solace, for instance. What a paradise.
5-star accommodations. I joined in. Truly, the local hospitality leaves something to be desired. Though the weather's dreadful, Garen added with a straight face, gesturing at the dripping ceiling. A few chuckles echoed around our little circle. Gallows humor, the only kind we had left out here. The brief mirth ebbed though, and a heavy quiet settled again. In the distance the artillery boomed on, and closer by, I heard the muffled sob of a soldier in pain or grief, being comforted by a comrade. We all sat with our own thoughts for a moment. Sergeant Hale approached from the darkness, a top bundle in hand. "All right, jokers, that's enough," he said, but not unkindly. "Get some rest while you can." He spread the tarp on the ground and motioned for us to lay ourselves out. "Lynn and Purdus are on first watch. We rotate in 3 hours." I nodded and unrolled my sleeping mat atop the tarp. "Sarge, I can take second watch," I offered. Truth be told, I doubted I'd sleep much anyway. My mind was still racing with images of that blood-crawled symbol and Gino's pale face. "None of us will sleep well, Doc, but try anyway." "That's an order." Too tired to argue, I simply murmured, "Yes, sir," and settled down. Garen was already stretching out, using his rolled greatcoat as a pillow with a groan of relief. Darwin leaned back against the wall next to us, Flamer cradled in his lap, his eyes already shut, though by his breathing I could tell he wasn't truly asleep. As I lay back, Merrick fidgeted with something beside me. He held the stub of a pencil and a small scrap of paper, probably torn from a morning ledger or a letter form. Catching my glance, he gave a sheepish shrug. "Figure I ought to write something down in case," he whispered. "It's to my girl back home. Been meaning to send a letter," but he trailed off. I offered him a faint, encouraging smile. "Good idea, Merrick. Write what you can. If we find an astropath or courier, I'll help get it sent." He nodded appreciatively and began scratching a few words onto the paper by the weak light of a loomstick. Across the room, Hale's voice was low, but carried authority. "Lights out. Keep chatter down. Sleep if you can, lads." He dimmed one of the lanterns himself. Merrick shuffled off a few meters to scribble in private. I pulled my coat over myself and closed my eyes. The hard floor under me might as well have been a feather bed. Every muscle was aching and lean. Still, sleep doesn't come easy on nights like this. I could hear droplets plinking into puddles, distant explosions, and nearer the occasional cough or muttered dream from a sleeping guardsman. In the darkness behind my eyelids, all I saw were the day's horrors. The blood-marked symbol, painted in gore, Geno's ashen face as he was carried away, Sivan's dying eyes from weeks ago, Lyring reaching for me in the trench. I must have drifted off at some point, despite it all, because a sudden hand on my shoulder startled me. Awake, what felt like moments later. I blinked, disoriented. It was still dark, but the ever-present haze of red from distant fires told me dawn was near. Sergeant Hale loomed over me, finger pressed to his lips. "Wake up, Doc," he whispered. "We're moving in 15. Something's stirring out there." He sat up, groggy and stiff around me. The others were already quietly packing gear. The rain had stopped, leaving everything clammy. 0400. Emperor. It felt like I'd only slept 10 minutes. "Enemy attack," I murmured, pulling on my gear. "Not sure," Hale replied under his breath. Box chatter says multiple engagements overnight. Could be cultists making a push. Could be something else. Either way, we have orders to rally at dawn for a counter-assault. I nodded and quickly rolled up my bedroll. My body protested at every movement, bruises and cuts making themselves known, but I bit back the pain. Before leaving, I noticed Merrick folding a piece of paper. He caught my eye and handed it to me. "Got that letter done," he said with a forced little smile. If something happens, maybe you can get it sent. Her name and address are on it." I took the note and tucked it safely in a pouch in my Medicate. "I'll get it delivered," I promised quietly, "but you'll be around to do it yourself." "All right," I tried to sound optimistic. Merrick bobbed his head and managed a nervous chuckle. Yeah, of course." We formed up and slipped back into the watered streets before dawn, linking up with the rest of the platoon. Marching out of that temporary shelter, I had the odd sensation of déjà vu, like a funeral procession, heading off to our own burial. Each of us was lost in our thoughts of home, of the friends we'd lost, of the unknown horrors ahead. I looked at the faces of my squad in the pre-dawn gloom, hard and filthy, eyes rimmed with red, yet each still carrying that spark of determination, perhaps even hope, stubbornly alive in the heart of misery. I clung to that spark myself, the Emperor's light, however faint, guiding us onward. None of us had any idea of the nightmare the coming day would bring. Perhaps it was better that way. The real nightmare began not long after we discovered those heretical symbols. At first, it was subtle. A few soldiers from other companies came down with an odd sickness. We medics started hearing the reports in the field hospitals. Guardsmen who should have recovered from their injuries instead developing raging fevers, their wounds turning black and surrounding with pus. The medici staff were baffled. One of the first cases I saw was a lieutenant from 32nd Company. He'd taken a simple last burn to the shoulder, clean through and through. Ought to have been a straightforward recovery, but a few days later, I saw him on a cot in our aid station, delirious and babbling, the veins around the wound site, bulging dark and foul-smelling pus, weeping through his bandages. Despite our best efforts, he was dead by nightfall, his skin mottled a swollen grey, and his lips black as pitch. None of us had seen anything like it. We burned his body, half convinced it was some kind of toxic chemical exposure or off-world virus he'd picked up. Then more cases appeared, a dozen in a week, scattered across different platoon. Guardsmen who had been injured in battle, and even some who hadn't. It made no sense, until it was too late for sense to matter. I was on duty during the night, when everything truly went to hell. We had set up a makeshift field hospital, in the shell of an old manufacturer. Think towering metal press machines, dormant conveyor belts, and rows of wounded laid out on CS between them. The station was packed, maybe 30-40 soldiers being treated, mostly blast and shrapnel injuries. A few burn victims, plus about half a dozen of them.
Mysterious fever cases we'd isolated at the far end behind some jurigged plastile screens.
It was well past midnight, illumination low. Only a few portable lumen lamps cast a worn white glow here and there. I was at Trooper Garen's side, tightening the tourniquet on his leg stump. Yes, stump. Earlier that day, an IED had caught him. I'd had to take his lower leg off after the infection from yesterday's bullet went necrotic. Despite everything, Garen was stable for now, propped up on a cot, and even cracking dark jokes through his pain. The man was irrepressible. I remember he was in the middle of teasing me. "Maybe I just wanted a bionic foot upgrade, Doc," he said with a weak grin, when a commotion erupted at the quarantine area across the room. Private Celine was one of the fever patients, a sturdy hive worker's daughter who'd been in 4th Squad. She'd gotten into a scrap with a rebel a few days prior and come out with a nasty human bite on her forearm. We'd cleaned it and thought nothing more until she collapsed with a fever of 104 that morning. Now she was behind the screen, thrashing and moaning on her cot. 2 orderlies hurried over to hold her down and check her restraints. I glanced that way while finishing a bandage on Garen. Suddenly, Celine went dead quiet. One of the medics, Corporal Farron, leaned in to check her pulse. In the dim light, I saw Celine's eyes snap open, milky white, no iris, no pupil. In that instant, she lunged up with a feral snarl that did not sound remotely human. Before Farron could recoil, she sank her teeth into his cheek and tore. Farron's scream was like nothing I'd heard, a gurgling, high-pitched shriek as he fell back, clutching his face. All hell broke loose. Farron staggered away, blood pouring between his fingers where half his cheek was bitten off. Celine, or what used to be Celine, rose from her cot, ripping free of the IV lines and leather straps like they were paper. The other orderly panicked and shoved her, sending her crashing into a metal instrument table. "Emperor, help us." She got back up without even flinching, a chunk of Farron's flesh still hanging from her lips. I heard more screams from behind the partition, wet guttural screams and a horrible chorus of moans. The other fever patients, by terror, they were changing too. We had 4 others back there, 2 wounded troopers and a pair of local PDF scouts. I could only catch glimpses through the gap in the plastile barrier, but I saw shapes convulsing, writhing off their CS. One let out a long, low moan that raised every hair on my body. For a heartbeat, I was frozen in place. This couldn't be real. This was like some Underhive horror story, not a battlefield hospital. Then one of them shambled around the end of the barrier, a guardsman by the uniform, but his head lolled at an impossible angle, neck clearly broken, and yet he was walking. Eyes filmed over, skin gray, green and peeling. He emitted a hungry hiss when he saw the cluster of us in the main area and started toward a wounded man on a cot. "Emperor, preserve us," I breathed. My mind finally caught up with reality. "Zombies, we have fracking zombies." The shout rang through the manufacture. Chaos-fueled plague, the curse of unbelief. Whatever name you give it, it was happening right in front of us. Panic erupted. Some of the wounded on their CS started screaming, or trying to crawl away despite their injuries. Medics and orderlies fumbled for weapons. A few of the walking dead were now stumbling out from behind the screen, slipping through or around the barrier. I saw one, a soldier whose entire midsection was a gaping blackened cavity, lurch onto a nearby patient and begin tearing at his throat with broken fingernails. The poor man shrieked as arterial blood sprayed. A nurse fired her last pistol wildly, red beams searing into another advancing corpse, but it hardly slowed the thing. I drew my own sidearm, hands shaking but instincts kicking in. A shambling figure in a tattered guard uniform. "Emperor," I recognized the face. It was Trooper Kamar, one of the lads we tagged as earlier that day, after we found him with his throat ripped out. Kamar's corpse came right at us, dragging one foot, half his neck missing. I raised my last pistol and put a shot square into his chest. The ruby bolt burned a smoking hole straight through him, and he kept coming, dead eyes fixed on me. Beside me, Garen had propped himself up on his cot, despite his missing leg. He grabbed a fallen last gun, and with impressive calmness, let off a burst at Kamar. The full auto spray blew apart the corpse's knee and thigh. That did the trick. Kamar collapsed to the ground, one leg gone, still clawing at the air, but unable to stand. I stepped forward and, whispering an apology to whatever remained of the man, fired a last round directly through his skull. The body finally went still, half its head a charred ruin. "Doc, behind you," Garen shouted hoarsely. I spun just in time. Sulline, the thing that had been Sulline, was charging at me. Finn's blood smeared across her chin. Her eyes were blank, and she was fast. I barely had time to get my arms up before she was on me, knocking me backward. We fell hard to the concrete floor, her on top of me. Her jaws snapped inches from my face, making a horrific clicking sound as her broken teeth gnashed, desperate to bite. I jammed my forearm under her chin, straining to keep those teeth away from my throat. Emperor. She was strong, obscenely strong, as though she didn't feel any restraint or pain. She snarled and thrashed, her fingers turned into curved claws, scrabbling at my sides. I felt white-hot pain as nails ran across my hip. Finding the gap where my flak vest had ridden up, I yelled in terror and fury, adrenaline surging. In a surge of strength, I managed to twist and roll, throwing her off me for a second. My hand found something solid on the floor, an OPEX unit someone had dropped, and I swung it with all my might into Sulline's skull. As she lunged again, crack, it hit hard, caving in part of her temple. She hissed and faltered, but unbelievably, she didn't go down. Suddenly, a jet of flame roared over my shoulder, engulfing Sulline in an eruption of Promethean fire. I scrabbled back on my hands and rear, heat washing over me. Trooper Darwin had arrived, bless his soul, dragging himself from his recovery seat with his flamer in hand. He bathed Sulline in flaming death, the roar of the weapon deafening in the enclosed space. Her screeches turned into an unearthly wail as she flailed, skin blackening and blistering in the inferno. Within moments, she was a thrashing silhouette in the fire, and then she went down, still twitching as flames consumed her. Darwin didn't stop. With a wordless yell, he turned the flamer on the quarantine area, spewing a wide arc of liquid fire across the remaining plague victims emerging from behind the partition. I staggered to my feet, coughing from smoke. In the hellish orange glare, I saw them. A half-dozen shapes lit up like grotesque candles. The smell was indescribable, burning hair, melting flesh. The sweet, sickly aroma of decay being roasted. Their moans of hunger turned to shrieks of agony as the Promethean did its emperor-given work. Even then, a couple of the flaming corpses continued to shamble forward a few steps, arms outstretched, before finally collapsing into smoldering heaps. In less than a minute, it was over. The manufacture's interior was a vision of hell, scattered fires casting dancing shadows across walls, spattered with blood. Bodies lay everywhere, some still writhing in their deathly throes. The wounded man who'd been attacked on his cot was now just a torn open carcass. Medic Ferens was dead too, slumped against a pillar with his face half gone and throat ripped out. Mercifully, he hadn't risen again, perhaps because he died immediately, or the infection hadn't had time. I'll never know. 3 other patients had been killed in the chaos, either devoured or shot or burned, and the creatures, the plague zombies, what remained of them was burning or blasted apart. For a long few seconds, none of us moved, as if not daring to believe it was really done.
Only the crackling of small fires and the whimpers of the surviving wounded broke the silence. I panted hard, my lungs drawing in smoke-tainted air. My side throbbed where I'd been clawed, but a quick glance down showed only torn fatigues and 3 shallow slashes across my hip. Painful, bleeding, but not life-threatening. Soline's nails had rad skin, but she hadn't managed to bite me. A miracle. Darwin was hunched over, supporting himself on a crate, Flamer still clutched tight. His face was pale and slick with sweat, eyes wide with shock. "Throne, Doc, what in the name of terror was that?" he rasped, voice trembling. I wiped a splatter of someone's blood off my cheek with a shaky hand. My mind was racing, trying to process. "A plague, a chaos-born plague," I managed to say. "It's reanimating the dead, turning them into damned zombies." Saying it aloud made it real, and I almost wanted to laugh at the absurd horror of it, but it was all too real. Around us, the survivors of the attack gathered, those who could still move. A young nurse with a bite wound on her forearm was sobbing uncontrollably, staring at the bloody gash in disbelief. She knew, as did I, what likely awaited her. Her eyes met mine, brimming with tears. She shook her head in denial, trembling. No, please." My throat felt thick. I knew what had to be done. Protocol was painfully clear. Anyone infected, even potentially, could not be allowed to turn. "Emperor, why is it always me?" I drew a fresh injector from my medic kit, one of the preloaded ones filled with a lethal sedative reserved for administering the Emperor's peace. Swiftly, she saw it in my hand, and her sobbing intensified, but she nodded through her tears. Her bravery broke my heart as she rolled up her sleeve, exposing a vein for me. Darwin turned away, swearing under his breath, and blinking hard, unable to watch this part. I knelt beside her, trying to steady my hands. "It will be okay," I lied softly, voice cracking. "It'll be like falling asleep. The Emperor will take you into his light." She bit her lip and closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she didn't pull away. I injected her quickly. In a few seconds, her breathing slowed, then stopped. Her clenched expression relaxed into a final peace. I quietly murmured the litany of the Emperor's mercy for her departing soul, and closed her staring eyes. My hands lingered on her cooling arm for a moment. There was no time for proper grief, but I felt a hot tear roll down my face. Another life I couldn't save, only end. Another soul I had to send to him because I wasn't able to do anything else. At that moment, with cruel timing, reinforcements burst into the manufacturer. 6 guardsmen led by Sergeant Hale and a commerce adjutant. They fanned in, last gun sweeping, taking in the carnage with horror and disbelief. The flicker of flames painted everything in hellish hues. Hale's gaze found me kneeling amidst bodies and flame, blood and soot smeared across my face. He looked at the nurse lying peaceful in my arms, then at the scorched remains of the plague creatures. Understanding and dread dawned in his eyes. "Report, medic," he said tightly, voice almost lost in the crackle of nearby flames. I rose unsteadily, snapping to something resembling attention. "Sarge, the fever patients, they turned, became monsters, attacked everyone. Was Mart neutralized them?" But I trailed off, gesturing around at the devastation. "We lost most of the Medici staff here, only a few of us left alive." One of Hale's men swore under his breath, making the sign of the Equi, throne of terror, plague zombies. "This world is damned." Silence. The cold new voice. Commissar Vittori himself stepping in through the doorway. He surveyed the scene with a mix of anger and what might have been fear behind his steel-hard eyes. "Listen up. I don't care what that was. It's dead now," he said sharply.
We will contain this. No one leaves this building until every remaining body is confirmed destroyed. Am I understood? Everyone nodded or muttered assent. Quarantine protocol. It was the only sensible course, and we all knew it. I swallowed and stepped
toward Orr and Hale. Shear. Trooper Garin is wounded and was exposed. His injury is badly infected. I fear he might. I couldn't finish, but I didn't need to. Garin was propped on one elbow on his cot nearby, panting, his face ashen. The bandages on his amputated stump were soaked through with foul, dark fluid, a sign of corruption spreading. He looked from me to the commas with mounting panic. I'm fine, Garin protested, voice ragged. It's a normal infection, nothing more. I feel a bit feverish, but I'm fine. He tried to swing his remaining leg off the cot, as if to stand, but Hale was at his side in an instant, gently pushing him back down. Shear approached, hand resting on the pommel of his chains. He stared hard at Garin, then at the ugly black vein patterns now creeping up the trooper's thigh. Trooper Garin, the commissar said quietly, for your sake and ours, you will be evacuated under strict containment. If there's even a hint of corruption, you know the penalty. His tone was flat, but we all knew he meant a bolt round to the head. A chill settled in my gut. Garin was my friend. We'd survived side by side for so long, and now some invisible contagion might rob him of a fighting chance. It wasn't fair, but nothing in war is fair. Darwin limped up beside me, resting a hand on my shoulder. Doc, you're scratched up too. I'm okay, I replied quickly. My side arced where I'd been clawed, but I truly didn't feel feverish or strange. Maybe I'd gotten lucky, or the exposure was minimal. Still, I had the apothecary mark me down for observation just in case. I wasn't going to hide it. I wouldn't put my comrades at risk of me turning into a monster. Under Commissar Richter's direction, we torched every corpse in the manufacturer, friend and foe alike. The bodies of the nurse and other non-infected dead we burned as well. There was no time or facility for rites, only a swift, purifying flame. Better a clean death than to let that filth animate them afterward. We evacuated the field hospital at once. Garin and 2 other wounded, who had been exposed, were carefully loaded onto stretchers. The rest of us moved out in grim silence, forming a tight column as we hurried back to base under first light. I walked beside Garin's stretcher the whole way, holding his hand and whispering reassurance, even as his fever climbed and delirium set in. He swung between mumbling snippets of Cadian marching songs and bouts of shivering, begging us to shoot him before he turned. Each time, I squeezed his hand and told him to hush, that he was fine for now. Inside, I knew the truth. I had seen those black veins and the glassy look in his eyes. Emperor, I knew. As we emerged into the muddy yard of our regimental aid post, dawn was staining the sky, a sickly gray. Smoke from the hive hung overhead like a funeral shroud. I looked back only once at the manufacturer we left behind. Flames still guttered from its blown-out windows, sending greasy plumes into the sky. The stench of burnt flesh clung to our uniforms, to our hair, to everything. Under my breath, I offered a final prayer for the souls of those we lost in there, and for our own souls in the days to come. Because I knew this was just the beginning. The plague was upon us, and things were about to get far, far worse. The hours that followed were among the darkest I can recall. We returned to our forward operating base to find it in chaos. The full magnitude of the disaster was becoming clear to everyone. Our base was an old PDF motorpool yard ringed by sandbags and chimera hulls. When we arrived, it looked less like a military camp and more like a field morgue. Dozens of soldiers milled about in varying states of shock and agitation. I saw a line of body bags, too many of them, laid out near the command tent. Nearby, a cluster of blood-soaked troopers sat on the ground, staring off into nothing or weeping quietly, while comrades tried to console them. The plague had struck in multiple places overnight, and it showed. Medics and priests were rushing to set up new quarantine cordons. A pall of fear hung over everyone. Soldiers whispered wild rumors that the whole hive was infected, that we were all as good as dead, that the Inquisition would purge us all. I caught more than one guardsman furtively, checking himself for bites or discoloration, eyes wide with panic. We delivered Garin and the other stretcher cases to a designated quarantine tent, a repurposed storage shed at the edge of camp. Armed guards stood outside it, their expressions grim beneath their rebreather masks. Anyone remotely suspected of infection was being isolated there. I accompanied Garin inside. It was a sparse metal-floored room, with a few CS and a chemical lamp casting harsh white light. 2 other troopers were there lying on separate CS, each guarded by a silent soldier with a shotgun at the ready. One infected man was already convulsing, strapped down tight, his skin a mass of surating sores. The other was unconscious or dead. I wasn't sure. I helped ease Garin onto an empty cot. His fever had worsened on the way. He was barely lucid now, muttering prayers to the Emperor between bouts of dry heaving. I poured some water into his mouth, and he managed a few sips, then coughed weakly. He beckoned me closer with a trembling hand. I leaned in. "Doc," he rasped, sweat pouring off him. "If I start changing, you do it, please." His eyes, glassy and fearful, locked onto mine. "I don't want to hurt anyone. You won't let me become one of those things, right?" My vision blurred with tears that I blinked away. I forced a tight nod. "I promise, Garin." My voice was thick. "But maybe it won't come to that. Maybe the sisters or the Inquisition have a cure." He managed the ghost of a grin, though his teeth were stained with blood. "Always bad liar, Doc." A spasm of pain crossed his face, and he groaned. I quickly checked the bandage on his leg. It was soaked through with black, foul-smelling ichor. The corruption was spreading fast. I had to bite the inside of my cheek hard to maintain composure. "I'll stay with you," I said softly. Garin grimaced, shaking his head. "No, you've got a mission yet." He struggled to breathe. "Just make it quick when it's time." "Okay." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. I simply clasped his hand. He squeezed once firmly, a soldier's camaraderie handshake, then released it, exhausted. A commotion outside drew my attention. Through the open door of the quarantine shed, I could see a crowd gathered in the yard. In front of them, standing on a stack of supply crates, like a makeshift gallows, was Commissar Colonel Richter. He had 2 soldiers kneeling at his feet, bound and wounded. Even from a distance, I recognized one. Corporal Janus, a Vox operator who'd been bitten earlier and apparently tried to flee the camp in terror. Rostor's voice rang out cold and clear. "These men carry the taint of the plague. By the authority of the God Emperor, I condemn them to his judgment." Before I or anyone could react,
He drew his bolt pistol and put a round through Janice's skull. Boom! The kneeling man's head vanished in a red mist. An instant later, boom! The second infected soldier was executed the same way. A few people in the crowd gasped or looked away, but no one interfered. We all knew it was necessary, as much as it turned our stomachs. Let this be a lesson, Rostor barked, pistol still smoking in hand. The Emperor's mercy is swift and final. We will not allow this corruption to spread. Show weakness and you will face the same. Stand firm, and we will overcome. Dismissed. He stepped down and attendants moved in with flamers to burn the two fresh corpses without ceremony. I clenched my jaw, stomach churning at the brutal sight, and turned back to Garin. He had mercifully drifted into a semi-conscious stupor, perhaps spared witnessing that. Moments later, Sergeant Hale entered the quarantine tent, followed by an ashen-faced Sister Hospitaller, Sister Emmanuel, who had been attached to our regiment. She had a blood-soaked bandage around her midsection. I realized she must have taken a hit or bite in the undercraft of fight, but kept going. The sister carried a censer billowing incense, and was quietly reciting prayers of warding. Hale had a data slate in hand, and looked grim. "Doc," he said quietly to me, nodding toward the door. "Command briefing in 5. Colonel's orders. They want you there." His eyes flickered to Garin on the cot, then back to me. He didn't ask the obvious question. I glanced at Garin, who was now murmuring deliriously, eyes closed. He didn't have long, perhaps minutes, perhaps an hour at most before the inevitable. "Sarge, I should stay." Hale shook his head firmly. "They need you, Hakon. This plague, none of us have seen its like. High Command wants every senior medic and officer's input." His voice softened. "Sister Emmanuel and I will watch him." The sister stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Go, child. Share what you have witnessed. It will help us purge this horror." Her face was drawn, but compassionate. I noticed she had a vial of sanctified morphia, ready in her other hand, perhaps intending to use it on Garin if needed to spare him suffering. It was some comfort, at least, that he wasn't alone. I gave Garin's shoulder a final squeeze. "The Emperor is with you, brother," I whispered. Whether he heard, I couldn't tell. Then I forced myself to leave my friend and follow Hale into the yard. My hands were balled into fists, nails digging into my palms. But I had a job to do. I had to compartmentalize. Rage and grief later. Duty now. We headed toward the central command tent, where a crowd of officers, sergeants, and specialists were gathering. The sky above was growing brighter with morning, revealing the full devastation around us. The hive skyline was jagged with broken spires. Columns of smoke rose from dozens of points. Distant gunfire and explosions echoed. Sporadic fighting still ongoing, and an unnatural hush seemed to hang in the air, as if the world itself was holding its breath after the night of horror. Inside the command tent, a hollow map projector cast a pale glow on a ring of haggarded faces. Colonel Vashi stood at the head, his eyes sunken and uniform spattered with mud. Kamisa Richter loomed beside him, hands clasped behind his back, bolt pistol still holstered but ready. A tech priest attendant clicked and whirred softly near the Voxcaster unit, red eyes glowing from beneath his hood. A few other notable figures were present, and Angia, the master of ordnance, a couple of veteran platoon leaders, and Sister Emmanuel's second in command, a grim-faced medic adept with burn scars. I slid in near the back, next to a wearier-looking lieutenant from 5th Company, who gave me a turn nod of acknowledgement. The air inside was thick with tension, and the acrid tang of incense and sweat. Colonel Varshis cleared his throat, the noise amplified by the Vox unit. Attention, despite exhaustion. Everyone straightened up. He began without preamble. I will be frank, the situation is dire. As many of you already know, we are facing a virulent contagion of chaos origin, the so-called plague zombies. He practically spat the words. Overnight, we lost nearly 60 guardsmen to infection and attacks. Many more are potentially exposed. Whole platoon in the lower hive have gone silent. His voice was heavy, each sentence landing like a hammer. A ripple of shock and grief passed through those assembled. 60 lost in a single night, without a pitched battle, just snuffed out by disease. Emperor 4, he continued, raising his voice. Astropathic contact has been made with Segment Command. The Inquisition is aware of our situation. He paused and I saw his jaw clench. They have ordered a full quarantine of Gurion Prime. The Navy's orbital fleet has authority to commence sterilization of Hive Solace via bombardment. If we cannot contain this affliction, that hit like a punch to the gut. Sterilization, orbital bombardment. It meant they were willing to wipe the entire hive, possibly the entire planet, off the map to stop this plague. My mouth went dry. A few people around the table exchanged alarmed glances or murmured curses. Kamisa Richter stepped forward, eyes blazing. However, he said, "We have one shot at avoiding such
An outcome. He nodded to the tech priest by the Vox, who pressed a rune on the holith. The flickering map of Hive Solace zoomed in on a central district, an icon blinking red at what I recognized as the Grand Cathedral at the heart of the hive. Voorhees picked up the narrative. Inquisitor Malik of the Ordo Solitarum managed to transmit some intelligence before our astropath succumbed. He grimaced. I hadn't realized our astropathic choir had been hit too, though it made sense. War plague wouldn't spare them. According to the Inquisition, this plague is war-porn and tethered to a focal locust, likely a sorcerer or unholy artifact at the heart of the cult's activity. The location has been pinpointed to the Grand Cathedral of Socus. He indicated the blinking red rune on the hollow display. A low hiss went through the tent. The Grand Cathedral, of course, the largest, most sacred site in the city, now likely profaned by chaos. Voorhees pressed on. The Inquisitor believes that if we eliminate the source, be it a heretic magus performing a ritual or a demon vessel or whatever it is, we can halt the spread of the plague, perhaps even weaken the existing infected. He looked around at us. Our orders are to assemble a strike force immediately, penetrate the hive's center, and destroy that source. For a moment, silence. It was a tall order, to say the least. The hive center was deep in enemy-held territory, possibly swarming with Emperor. Knew how many cultists and plague zombies, and they wanted a small team to go in, because let's face it, we didn't have the manpower for anything larger anymore. Lieutenant Salvatore from 5th cleared his throat. Sir, how are we to get through the hordes? We barely have 2 companies of healthy troops left, and maybe a dozen functioning vehicles. Voorhees nodded grimly. Reinforcements are inbound from the 233rd and 98th regiments, but they won't land in time. We have to move now before this plague grows beyond any ability to contain. The plan is two-pronged. He pointed at the map. Captain Lamont will lead what remains of 2nd Company in a frontal armored thrust down Avenue Primus toward the Cathedral Plaza, with our Leman Russ and the 2 Chimies We have operational that should draw the majority of the enemy plague victims and cultists alike, and hopefully clear a path. Commissar Ortor interjected, voiced like ice. It will be a one-way trip for many of them. They know and accept this. I swallowed a sacrificial diversion. Emperor Voorhees then traced a line on the map through some side routes. Meanwhile, a smaller team under Sergeant Hale's command will infiltrate via maintenance subtunnel 16B here, which leads under the cathedral's east wing. That team will consist of volunteers and specialists. Hale's squad, what's left of it. A few from 5th Company and Sister Emmanuel. Their objective is to breach the inner sanctum, locate the source of the plague, and destroy it with extreme prejudice. The Inquisitor is sending one of his acolytes with a melter charge to assist. They're arriving within the hour. He paused, eyes sweeping over us. Make no mistake, this is likely a suicide mission. But if we do nothing, orbital bombardment will wipe this hive clean by tomorrow. And we along with it. We have a chance to save Gorian Prime from that fate, and perhaps save untold billions on other worlds by containing this infection here and now. A tense hush followed his words. I glanced at Hale. His face was set in that hard, resolved way I knew well. He'd already decided he'd see it through no matter what. Others looked pale, but determined. There was really no choice. In the guard, there rarely is. Commissar Richter stepped forward again, taking control of the floor. The Emperor has put us in this trial by fire to test our faith. We will not shrink from it. The ones who go on this mission will be remembered as heroes of the Imperium, whatever the outcome. He practically glared at each of us, daring anyone to show cowardice. To my surprise, it was Sister Hospitor Emmanuel who spoke up next. She was swaying on her feet from her own wound, but her voice was firm. Colonel Commissar, the Medici staff have prepared holy unguents and purgation doses. We'll administer them to the strike team to slow any infection if exposed. We stand ready. Voorhees inclined his head respectfully. Thank you, sister. The briefing turned to practical details. Ammo was low as always, but they'd concentrate what they could for the mission. Each volunteer would carry extra promethium or grenades depending on role. Flamers and incendiaries were prioritized. Nothing less would do much to plague zombies. We had one working sentinel walker that might accompany the diversion column as scout. No air support. The few Valkyries were busy fing non-infected personnel to fallback zones. And truth be told, no pilot wanted to fly low over a plague-ridden hive if they could help it. Through it all, I found myself oddly calm. Perhaps it was shock or fatalism. I'd just seen the worst nightmare imaginable. My best friend was likely dying or dead behind me. At that point, fear had taken a back seat. A cold resolve filled me. A spark of anger, even. Whatever caused this plague, whoever that cult leader or demon was, I wanted to put an end to it. It was an unfamiliar feeling for a medic whose duty is to preserve life. But I'd gladly deal death to this filth. Medici Hakan, Colonel Voorhees said, looking toward me now. You're the ranking field medic who has seen these creatures in action. You'll be attached to Hale's tunnel team. Your insight and steady hand will be vital. There was no question embedded in that statement. It was simply my duty being given. I straightened. Yes, sir, I replied, voice clear. Do you have anything to add, or any advice for those fighting the infected? He asked. All eyes turned to me. I cleared my throat, suddenly conscious of how ragged and stained I must look. But there was no time for niceties. Aim for the head, I said bluntly. It's the best way to stop them. Last gun's 2-center mass might not drop one fast enough unless you hit something vital. But destroy the brain or sever the spine, and they go down for good. My voice gained strength as I recalled the encounters. Fire works best. The plague hates fire. If you've got a flamer, use it freely. Keep your distance. Do not let them grapple or bite. Even a scratch can. I faltered, thinking of Garen. Even a scratch can infect. If anyone is wounded by them, you must speak up immediately and quarantine. Or I didn't finish. They all understood. A young Vox officer looked queasy, but nodded, checking the clasp on his neck guard. Lastly, I said, stick together. A lone soldier is a soft target for a pack of those things. Cover each other. Don't let anyone get swarmed. Commissar Richard gave an approving grimace at that. It was basically standard guard doctrine, but hearing it about undead monsters made a few faces blanch. Very well, for he concluded. You have 20 minutes to gear up, say your prayers, steel yourselves. We move out and execute the plan immediately after. Dismissed, and Emperor be with us all. A quiet but fervent reply, afore the Emperor went around, and we filed out each to prepare for what could be our final battle. As I exited the tent, Hale clapped me on the shoulder. "Ready, Doc?" he asked, searching my face. I gave a single firm nod. "Ready, Sarge." We broke off to gather our gear. I quickly restocked my Medicate with whatever potentially useful supplies remained. Extra gauze, a few vials of Tran, though it felt futile against the kind of wounds we'd see. A syringe of Superstem in case someone went down and needed a jolt to keep moving. And 2 blessed morphia ampules the sisters provided for Emperor's peace purposes if needed. Before heading out, I detoured to the quarantine tent. I had to know and fulfill my promise, if it came to that. Inside, the scene was quieter now. The unconscious infected trooper had passed away. His body lay covered with a sheet, awaiting burning. Sister Emmanuel knelt over Garen's cot, eyes closed in prayer. She heard me and looked up, her expression telling me everything. Garen was dead. He lay limp and pale, one arm dangling off the cot, dog tag still clutched in his hand. I approached slowly. "Did he?" She met my gaze gently. "He passed moments ago, peacefully." She held up an empty syringe. She had given him Emperor's peace herself when she saw the end nearing. I closed my eyes and exhaled a breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. A mix of relief and sorrow washed over me. He hadn't turned. He hadn't become one of those things. That was a mercy in this hell. The sister squeezed my shoulder. "I'm sorry, son," I nodded wordlessly. There were no adequate words. Instead, I straightened and saluted Garen's covered body. A gesture of respect between comrades. "I'm going to finish this, Garen," I murmured under my breath. "I swear it." Then I left to join the strike team. Our strike team assembled near an old storm drain that would lead into the maintenance tunnels beneath the Hive's central district. We were a melee bunch, about 20 guardsmen in total, the remnants of our original squads, plus a few others. We were the relatively unscathed, the ones still able to fight effectively. Looking at each person, I could see the steely acceptance in their eyes. We all knew the odds of coming back were slim. Sergeant Hale was at the head, quietly conferring with a slim hooded figure, the inquisitorial acolyte who had arrived with a satchel full of melter charges, basically a portable bomb to collapse the cathedral or obliterate whatever needed obliterating. The acolyte gave me the creeps. He wore a half-mask rebreather etched with silver purity seals and barely spoke a word. Trooper Lin was with us,
reloading his long-lost sniper rifle. He'd volunteered despite the terror of last night. Darwin was there too, arm in a sling from his injured shoulder, but still lugging his flamer with grim determination. Merrick from my squad was checking his rifle's power pack, his young face set with focus. I gave him a small nod, and he managed a tight smile. Sister Emmanuel was with us, her white hospitaller robes traded for a more practical flak armor marked with a red cross. She carried a last pistol and a small chainsword, and her pack rattled with vials of holy water and other ecclesiarchy paraphernalia. Commissar Raptor was not coming. His place was overseeing the larger diversion and the defense of the base. But as we prepared to move, he approached our group. He looked each of us over, and for once his hard expression softened just a hair. In a low voice meant only for us to hear, he said, "Guardsmen, what you do today, you do in his name, and for all mankind. You have my respect and my faith. Complete your mission or die with your last guns blazing. The Emperor protects." It was the closest to a heartfelt pep talk I'd ever heard from a commissar. We all straightened and saluted. "For the Emperor," we answered. He held our gaze a moment longer, then pivoted on his heel and marched off to mount his chimera for the frontal assault. At Hale's signal, we moved out. The diversionary column departed first. We heard the roar of the Limon Russ's engine and the chugging of chimneys as they advanced down the main boulevard 2 blocks over. Within minutes, the thunder of its battle cannon echoed to us, and sporadic auto gunfire rattled in response. The diversion was underway, drawing the hordes like moths to a flame. We slipped into the storm drain single file. It was a tight squeeze, peeling open a rusted grate and descending a ladder into the murk below. The tunnels were a claustrophobic maze of maintenance corridors, drain pipes, and abandoned conduits. Our only light came from shoulder-mounted lamps and the sickly green glow of chemloom sticks we'd brought. I was near the middle of the formation. The air stank of mildew, sewage, and something else. The coppery tang of blood and rot carried on subtle drafts. The further we went, the stronger that foul odor became. Everyone smelled it. It was the scent of the plague. We moved as quietly and quickly as we could. The plan was straightforward. Navigate the tunnels to an access point beneath the Grand Cathedral's east wing, then breach upward. According to the
engine Sears maps, some old service lifts or ladders existed there. It was maybe a kilometer's trek. All around, muffled booms reverberated, likely the battle raging above. Now and then, dust rained from cracks in the ceiling, and we'd pause, holding our breath, fearing a collapse. Through some grates we passed, I caught fleeting glimpses of the surface. At one point, I saw feet shuffling along a street, dozens of them. The feet were bloated, bare or clad in tatters, clearly belonging to the infected swarming toward our lines. Mercifully, none noticed us below. Halfway through, as we crept through waist-deep foul water in a large drainage pipe, we encountered our first plague victims in the tunnels. 3 of them were feasting on something thrown, and it looked like a still twitching servitor drone in a side alcove. Lynn's light caught their silhouettes. Hale held up a fist. Hailed. We silently raised weapons with practiced ease. Born of vengeance, we took them down. Lynn's sniper shot took the first in the temple, a neat pop, and it dropped. Marek and I opened up on the second red labolts, perforating its chest and neck. It stumbled, turning towards us with a gurgling hiss. Then Sister Emmanuel stepped forward and, uttering a prayer, swung her chains through its skull. The third rushed us with a ghastly howl. But Darwin had been itching for payback. He spewed a short burst of flame that engulfed it. The thing shrieked and flailed, collapsing into the filthy water, thrashing until it stilled burning. Heart pounding. I quickly scanned our group. No injuries. We pressed on. We emerged from the drain pipe into a wide undercrafted corridor supported by heavy pillars. According to the map, we were directly beneath the Grand Cathedral's floor. Now this vast space had once been crypts or storage for holy artifacts. Our lights revealed broken crates, scattered bones, spilled scrolls and bodies. Emperor, so many bodies. The entire undercraft was filled with piled corpses and caked gore. It looked like the cultists had been dragging bodies down here, maybe as offerings, maybe just to clear the streets above. The effect was a charnel house. Dozens upon dozens of corpses, maybe more, strewn across the stone floor, or stacked against walls. I had to swallow hard to keep from retching at the smell and sight. At the far end, a broad stairway led up, presumably into the cathedral proper. A flicker of unnatural greenish light danced up there, casting shadows. We cautiously advanced among the dead. We all had weapons raised, half expecting the corpses at our feet to grab our ankles. But they stayed still, thank the throne. Maybe the purge had cut off whatever force animated them, or perhaps these were just victims that never reanimated for whatever reason. Hale gestured for us to fan out as we neared the stair. Angry voices echoed from above, human voices chanting some guttural litany. The cult leader and his cronies, no doubt. I caught sight of movement on the stairs, a few shuffling figures descending, maybe to retrieve more bodies. Hale signaled, and we ambushed them. 3 ragged cultists, once ordinary men, now scabrous and poxmarked, came down carrying a limp cadaver. They froze as our lights hit them. We cut them down mercilessly in a crossfire of last shots. They fell without a sound, tumbling among the very corpses they'd come to collect. So much for stealth now. Above us the chanting faltered. A furious wet voice bellowed something in a language that made my ears ache. And then the moaning chorus of the damned swelled louder. They knew we were here. Go, go. Hale barked, and we charged up the staircase. What awaited us in the Grand Cathedral's main chamber was a scene from the depths of insanity. We burst into the immense nave, weapons blazing, and all my nightmares since landing on this planet suddenly seemed quaint. The once majestic cathedral was desecrated beyond recognition. Statues of saints had been toppled and smashed. Foul symbols were smeared across the marble floor, and high vaulted walls in blood and filth. Pews were piled into barricades or altars of flesh. Candles of tallow, I dread to think, made from what? Burned with sickly green flames, and the people, throngs of plague-ridden, filled the aisles, packed shoulder to shoulder in a swaying mass. There must have been hundreds. Many were kneeling or prostrate, murmuring praise to their new foul god. Others simply milled about with blank stares. At our sudden appearance, the congregation of horror turned as one, eyes lit with malevolence or hunger. At the far end, on what used to be the altar, stood the architect of all this, the cult leader, a plague priest of Nergal. He had once worn imperial priest robes, now befouled and hanging in tatters from his bloated frame. His body was enormous with corruption, swollen with disease, skin cracked and oozing. Horns or bone spurs jutted from his back. His face, Emperor's mercy, half of it was a leering skull, the other half a mass of boils, with one bulging eye glaring with insane fervor. He clutched a staff topped with a triple skull sigil, and around him swirled swarms of flies despite the season and altitude. Unholy light, the same green glow radiated from a floating orb set atop the altar, pulsing in time with the foul canticles.
For a heartbeat, even our disciplined group froze, overwhelmed by the sight and the stench of raw chaos that hit us like a physical wave. The plague priest roared, pointing a clawed hand at us. "Kill the interlopers, feed them to Grandfather Nurgle." His voice was a phlegm-choked rasp that nevertheless boomed through the vast space. And then the horde was upon us. They surged down the nave, a tide of walking dead and frenzied cultists. Our flamers whooshed to life, and grenades were lobbed. But there were so many, the initial blast of our volley tore huge chunks out of the crowd. A frag grenade blew apart a knot of plague zombies in a shower of corrupted gore. A flamer stream caught a swath of them, turning them into writhing torches. But the rest came on heedless of losses. "Form a line, channel them," Hale shouted. We instinctively fell back to the bottleneck of the grand stairway we'd come from, so they couldn't all mob us at once. It was the only way to avoid being swarmed from all sides. I found myself firing my last gun at point blank into a postulant face as it loomed out of the darkness. The thing had once been an elderly woman. Now her jaw hung by strips of flesh. My shot blew the top of her head off, but another creature clawed over her collapsing body to reach for me. Trooper Merrick bayoneted that one through the eye and kicked it back. The battle devolved into brutal close-quarters chaos, the roar of gunfire, the shrieks of the damned, the chants of the heretic priest. It all blended into a cacophony. Darwin stood forward, gouting flame in controlled arcs to make a wall of fire. Each burst incinerated dozens, but each time he had to pause to let the pilot light refuel, more would surge through the charred gap. His face was set in a rich, teeth bared as he unleashed righteous fire. A plague-ridden brute stumbled through the flames, its entire body ablaze, and still swung a piece of broken pew at Darwin, knocking him flat. Sister Emmanuel rushed forward, planting a bolt from her sanctified bolt pistol into its chest at near zero range. The explosive round blew the creature apart, saving Darwin. To my left, I saw Trooper Lynn line up his sniper rifle at the back of the cathedral, trying to get a clear shot at the plague priest on the altar. He fired, a perfect shot by all rights, hitting the priest square between the eyes, but an instant before impact, a swarm of flies coalesced and intercepted the bullet, deflecting it with some foul magic. The priest laughed, a horrible gurgling sound, and raised his staff high. Tendrils of sickly warp energy began snaking from the glowing orb toward our position. The orb, that must be the focal artifact or conduit. The acolyte with the melter charge was pinned behind a fallen column to our right, waiting for an opening to sprint towards the altar. At this rate, he'd never make it. We had to thin the horde more for the Emperor. Hale bellowed, chainsworded revving. He waited a step forward into the choke point, cleaving a plague zombie from shoulder to hip. "Push them back," he cried. Those of us with melee weapons stepped up alongside him, Hale with his chainsword, Sister Emmanuel with her own smaller chain blade, a few troopers with bayonets and combat knives. I slung my last gun and drew my long knife and last pistol, sticking close behind Hale to guard his flank. We struck out in a desperate counterattack, trying to gain a few meters of ground. Hale hacked left and right with fury, dropping foes with each swing. I core spraying around him. I emptied my pistol into an oncoming trio of plague-riddled cultists, felling two. The third lunged at me, slamming me against a pillar. Its hands closed around my throat. I gagged at its reeking breath as I grappled, trying to keep its teeth from my face. Hale saved me. With a backhand swing, he sheared the creature's arms off at the elbows, then thrust the chains forward into its chest. It fell, twitching.
Suddenly, a searing bolt of energy crackled past us and struck the ground at our feet, exploding in a burst of noxious fumes. The plague priest had unleashed some warp blast from his staff. The stone floor sizzled and bubbled where it hit, and one guardsman caught in the edge collapsed with a scream as his legs gave out beneath him, flesh dissolving. The priest began gathering power for another strike, chanting blasphemous words that made the very air quiver. We needed to silence him, and fast. I tore my gaze from that horror and saw just a couple meters ahead, a clear path among the bodies. The horde in our immediate front was temporarily mostly down. Piles of smoldering corpses forming a ghastly barricade. Beyond it, I saw only a handful of his personal guards between us and the altar, and I saw the acolyte. He had circled around along the periphery, using the piles of dead as cover, melt charge in hand, creeping closer to the altar's base. Hale saw it too. He turned his head slightly and shouted, "Cover the acolyte," suppressing fire. Those of us with ranged weapons unleashed everything we had left at the far end of the cathedral. I swapped a fresh power cell into my less gun and began picking off the plague priest's honor guard. Grotesque, still-living cult zealots armed with rusted melee weapons. They rushed to intercept the acolyte. 1, 2, 3. We managed to drop most of them under a hail of loss and solid rounds. The plague priest howled in outrage and possibly fear as he noticed the lone hooded figure darting toward the altar. He swung his staff toward his would-be assailant, chanting a word of dark power. Too late, with a speed that belied his disease-ravaged body, the acolyte lunged up the altar steps and slapped the melter charge against that glowing orb of corruption. "Emperor, bless us," I whispered, ducking instinctively and grabbing Hale's arm. "Get down." Our entire team hit the floor or dove behind cover as a brilliant white-hot flash erupted at the altar. Boom! The melter charge detonated with the fury of a miniature star. The orb shattered in an explosion of sickly green fire, chunks of corrupted masonry, and bits of altar blasted outward. The shockwave flung nearby plague zombies like ragdolls. A chorus of unearthly wails went up as the tether of warp energy snapped. Many of the plague victims collapsed outright, as if puppets with their strings cut. Others clutched their heads, stumbling in confusion. The psychic pressure that had been suffocating the very air lifted abruptly. When I lifted my head, ears ringing, I beheld a sight that filled me with both triumph and horror. The plague priest was reeling, half his body torn apart by the blast. One arm gone, much of his bloated torso peeled open to reveal squirming innards. Yet somehow the monster still lived, or at least hadn't fallen yet. He let out a wet, animalistic howl of pure rage and despair. Hale wasn't going to let this chance slip by. "Finish him," he roared. He hauled himself up from cover and began charging down the now thinned aisle toward the ruined altar. Those cultists and undead still active were in disarray. Many outright fleeing or writhing on the floor as the plague's hold faltered. Our surviving squad poured fire into the staggering form of the plague priest. Last bolts and solid slugs peppered his putrid flesh. Sister Emmanuel advanced boldly, firing her bolt pistol. A round took the priest in the shoulder, another in the gut, each detonation blowing off chunks of rotten meat. And still he refused to die, dragged along by unholy vitality and hatred. It was Hale who reached him first. With an wordless battle cry, our sergeant leapt onto the shattered altar and swung his chainsword in a two-handed overhead arc. The whirring teeth bit into the plague priest's remaining neck, grinding through diseased muscle and spine. With a final spray of black blood
and a heinous gurgle, the plague leader's head came free, bouncing down the altar steps and coming to rest at the feet of a toppled imperial saint statue. A collective hush fell. The priest's headless corpse toppled over with a wet thud. For a heartbeat, none of us dared to breathe. Then I realized I no longer heard the moans or screams of any attackers. The surviving plague zombies had all collapsed into true death when the priest fell and his warp curse lifted. Those cultists not killed were dropping their weapons, trying to flee, or simply staring in shock. Without their demagogue, they were just sick, terrified men again, easily rounded up by our wrathful guardsmen. It was over. Emperor's mercy. It was over. I sank to my knees on the blood-slick floor, adrenaline giving way to an all-consuming wave of exhaustion and relief. We had done it. Terror's throne. We actually did it. Around the cathedral, my comrades were securing the area, finishing off any twitching plague victim, restraining the few cultists who surrendered. Fires crackled from the melter blast's aftermath, and our flamers' work. The grand space, once a place of worship, was now a scene of utter devastation. But we had saved what was left of this world from something even worse. Hale pulled his chainsword free of the plague priest's remains and stumbled back, chest heaving. I rushed to his side, catching his arm to steady him. He was spattered head to toe in foul blood, but mostly uninjured. A few scratches, nothing more. He gave me a weary grin. "Good to see you in one piece, Doc." I couldn't help but grin back, wiping gore off my cheek. "Likewise, Sarge." Nearby, Sister Emmanuel was kneeling over a fallen guardsman, saying last rites. We lost a few in that final charge. Trooper Merrick limped over, a shallow cut on his forehead, eyes wide as the reality of victory slowly dawned on him. "Emperor, we did it." He asked no one in particular. "We did," I confirmed softly. "Hive Solace is saved." Saved was relative. The hive was broken, scarred, its population decimated. But it wasn't going to be virus-bombed from orbit now, nor turned into a charral pit of undeath, spreading filth beyond this planet. That counted for something huge. The inquisitorial acolyte's body was nowhere to be seen amid the rubble near the altar. He'd paid the ultimate price setting that charge. Ashes and glory for him. We would remember his sacrifice. Within the hour, our reinforcements and the diversion team, or what was left of them, joined us at the cathedral. The remaining cultists were put to the flame or the sword. No mercy for traitors. Some few civilians, miraculously uninfected, emerged from hiding spots in the crypts and chapels, drawn by the cessation of fighting. I saw 2 frightened, grime-covered children, led out by a soot-faced guardsman, survivors who had huddled in a vest during the madness. The sight of those kids alive and safe at last nearly brought tears to my eyes. Amid all this horror, at least a few innocents endured. It made our struggle feel worthwhile. Conclusion, a new dawn. Not long after, I found myself sitting on the steps of the ruined cathedral. As daylight streamed in through shattered vaults above, the sun's rays felt warm, almost gentle, on my blood-stained face. I took off my helmet and breathed in deep. The air still wire of smoke and death, but beneath that, I swore I caught a hint of something new. The smell of rain on the wind, cleansing and fresh, a hint of renewal around me. The remaining guardsmen were gathering the wounded, consolidating our hard-won hold on Hive Solace's center. Colonel Voorhees and Commissar Richter arrived by Chimera to take stock of the victory. Their faces, though haggarded, showed a measure of pride when they looked at us.
The few battered survivors of the strike team. I looked at my hands, still stained with grime and blood, despite multiple attempts to wipe them clean. These hands had saved lives and taken them in equal measure in the last 24 hours. As a medic, I'd always prayed to heal, not to kill. But here, at the end of it all, I whispered a prayer of thanks to the God Emperor for guiding my hands to do what was needed, both the mending and the merciful ending. In the ruined plaza outside the cathedral, I saw Sister Emmanuel tending to a soldier's wounds, the two of them sharing a quiet prayer of thanks. Darwin sat on an ammo crate, finally letting an orderly wrap his burned, injured shoulder. He winced, but he was smiling faintly. Low stick hanging from his lips as he recounted to a comrade how many rotten grows he'd flamed. Merrick was collapsed on some steps, actually asleep for the first time in what felt like ages, clutching the letter to his sweetheart in his hand. I made a mental note to make sure it got sent out on the next astropath. Though Emperor willing, Merrick might just deliver it in person someday. Commissar Richter was pacing through the aftermath, barking orders to ensure all corpses were reburned and that security was tight. But even he at one point paused by the toppled statue of an imperial saint and bowed his head, perhaps in a moment of private reflection or gratitude. In that instant, he didn't look like a fearsome avatar of discipline, just another weary man who had seen too much death and was relieved it was over. Not far off, I glimpsed a pair of gaunt, dust-covered civilians, a mother clutching her young son, being carefully helped out of a half-collapsed side chapel by two of our troopers. Miraculously, they had survived this nightmare, uninfected, hiding until now. The sight of that mother and child alive amid all the death lit a small warm flame in my chest. Amid the devastation, life endured, and I had helped make that possible. Sergeant Hale came over and gingerly sat down beside me on the cathedral steps. He let out a long breath and removed his cap, running a hand through sweat-matted hair. For a while we just watched the sun rise higher, illuminating the ruins in a golden light that somehow made them seem less horrific. Hale broke the silence first. "Hell of a job, Doc," he said quietly. I gave a tired chuckle. "Likewise, Sarge, couldn't have done it without you." That was an understatement. His leadership had kept me and many others alive through this ordeal. We sat in comfortable silence a bit longer. I realized I was trembling slightly, the adrenaline crash, the emotional overload of everything catching up. Hale noticed and patted my shoulder. "You all right?" I nodded. "I will be." It was true, I was exhausted beyond words, my heart heavy with the loss of so many. Jano, Garin, Lin, we lost him in the final push. I saw his body being carried out, a stray bolt to the throat. But amidst that there was a seed of solace. We had given our all, and some of us lived to see the dawn after all. "You know," Hale said after a moment, "they'll probably give out medals for this." He gestured vaguely at the carnage. "Maybe even a unit citation. Not that it brings back the fallen." I shrugged softly. Medals were the last thing on my mind. "I think I'd rather have a week of sleep and a hot meal," I said, attempting a bit of humor. Hale actually laughed at that. A genuine warm laugh. Here. A sudden wave of emotion washed over me. Then, faces of the lost flashing through my mind. Garin joking about wanting a bionic foot. Civ clutching my collar. Nurse Farron's terrified eyes. The nameless young trooper I gave Emperor's Peace to last night. My eyes burned, and I quickly wiped at them. A medic isn't supposed to cry in front of the troops, but Hale saw and just gave a small nod of understanding. "It's okay, Doc," he murmured. They'll be remembered. We'll remember them. I took a shuddering breath and steadied myself. Is that we will? In that moment, I made a silent promise to the fallen. I'd carry their stories with me. Every guardsman I couldn't save would live on in my memories and prayers. That's the best memorial I can give them. A distant thunder rumbled. For a split second, I tensed, thinking it artillery. But no, it was real thunder. The dark clouds that perpetually loomed over Gurin Prime were finally breaking. Fat raindrops began to patter down on the ruins, washing soot and blood into pink rivulets. Rain to wash away the filth. If I were a superstitious man, I might say the Emperor was cleansing this place. I tilted my head up and let the cool rain wash over my grime-caked face. It felt purifying. As the downpour intensified, Colonel Voorhees appeared, moving down the line, checking on troopers, offering quiet commendations. He reached me and Hale. Sergeant, medic, he nodded to each of us. Fine work. You've both done the Imperium proud this day. Thank you, sir, Hale replied, struggling to his feet to salute. I got up as well, doing likewise, despite my protesting muscles. Voorhees returned the salute crisply, then, in an uncommon gesture, extended his hand to shake ours. I mean it, he said, voice thick with emotion he usually kept hidden. I'll see to it that High Command hears of your valor. Then the colonel moved on, cape flapping in the rain, back stiff, off to coordinate the next steps of recovery and defense. I sat back down, somewhat stunned by the personal thanks. Hale just gave me a lopsided grin. Well, how about that? The colonel shaking a lowly medic's hand. I snorted. Might be a sign of the apocalypse. We both laughed quietly, an easy camaraderie laugh that comes with the end of a long ordeal. Around us, guardsmen were beginning to organize for cleanup and securing the area. It's fear. The immediate crisis was done, and now the banal work of after-battle routine began.
Treating wounds, tallying casualties, refortifying positions in case of any lingering threats. For once, it seemed almost easy, lacking the frantic desperation of the day before. I knew that soon enough, another transport or war would come calling. That's the life of the Imperial Guard, war without end. Perhaps we'd be redeployed to another front after this, maybe finally rotated off-world for rest. Emperor knows we needed it. But right now, in this moment, I allowed myself to savor being alive. I allowed myself to feel proud, yes proud, that despite everything, I had done my duty and helped see this through. I glanced at my Medicaid lying beside me on the step. The white aquila on its lid was scuffed and stained, but still visible. I realized my hands had unconsciously been tracing the aquila as a focus. I whispered a small prayer of thanks to the God Emperor, not for victory in battle, though I was thankful for that, but for granting me the strength to endure and serve. All around me, my fellow survivors were doing similar in their own ways. A quick prayer, a shared laugh, a far-off look, remembering a friend. When I became a field medic, I thought my job was just to patch up wounds and save lives. And it is at its core, but it's more than that. It's giving comfort to the dying, when comfort is all you can give. It's carrying the weight of hopes and final words and still soldiering on. It's standing in the worst places of humanity's despair and saying, I'm here. In the last 2 days, I've been a medic, a soldier, a judge, and a witness. I've seen humanity at its absolute worst, and also glimpsed those precious sparks of nobility and courage that make it all worth it. Hale clapped me on the shoulder gently as he stood.
Rest while you can. He said. He only used my first name in rare moments. Emperor knows knows what fresh hell tomorrow brings. I nodded and leaned back against the cracked stone. He was right. The war never really ends, not for the Imperial Guard. There would be another hive, another rebellion, or
Xeno invasion, or Emperor knows what, and odds are we'd be thrown right back into the meat grinder when that time came. But for now, we had a reprieve. The rain was washing the blood from the steppes. The immediate battle was over, and we survivors had earned this sunrise. I closed my eyes and allowed myself a small, weary smile. I had survived. By the Emperor's grace, I was still here while so many good folks weren't. That was a sobering thought, and in time, maybe a burden one. Why me? Why did I get to live? But as a medic, I've learned not to question that too hard. Some live, some die. All I can do is try my damnedest to tip the scales toward life. And as long as I draw breath, I'll continue to do just that. This is what life is like as an Astra Militarum field medic. Moments of terror, of impossible choices, of horror and fleeting joy. It's holding a gut-shot boy's hand as he dies, calling for his mother. It's yelling at a hardened sergeant to sit his ass down so I can bandage his bleeding leg. It's feeling utterly helpless sometimes and indestructible at others. It's seeing humanity at its most vulnerable and most courageous, often at the same time. It's a burden I carry with grim pride. I'm just a medic, one humble guardsman with a satchel of bandages and a few drugs, doing my part to keep this insane war machine rolling one soldier longer. But on days like this, I feel like that's the most important job in the galaxy. The rain was slackening, the clouds starting to break. A shaft of pure sunlight pierced through, illuminating the Aquila emblazed on a shattered pillar nearby. I took it as a good omen, or at least a poetic coincidence. Hale finished checking on a few of the lads and waved me over to help with a makeshift aid station they were setting up for our wounded. With a groan, I hauled myself up, back to work. A medic's duty never really ends after all. Before I went to join him, I cast one last look over the cathedral plaza. Bodies were being gathered, fires doused, a few surviving civilians, a dozen at most, out of a city of millions, were being led gently to waiting evac vehicles, their nightmare finally over. Guardsmen stood tall, weary, but victorious, sharing cigarettes and cantons, bandaging each other's scrapes as they recounted close calls. We had fought, and we had survived. By the Emperor's will, we had prevailed. I allowed myself to savor that feeling for just a second. Then I hefted my Medicaid, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the next cluster of wounded troopers, calling, "Doc, over here," in voices both pained and hopeful. The corner of my mouth quirked up despite the exhaustion. Some things never change. There were always more wounds to treat, more soldiers to reassure, more jokes to crack to keep them sane. This war might never end, but as long as I'm breathing, I'll be there in the thick of it, doing what I can. In the Guard, we have a saying, "Only in death does duty end." As I splashed through the puddles and ruin toward my waiting comrades, I understood those words more than ever. My duty hadn't ended. Not here, not now. And that was all right. Because if the past days had proven anything, it's that even in the heart of horror, a lone medic with steady hands and faith in the Emperor can make a difference. One life at a time. Only in death does duty end. I am not dead yet, so I will carry